I am so long-winded. I recognize that. I can live with it again. Okay, so what we want to talk about now for the next few slides, we want to talk about what does the Enlightenment say about stuff other than reason? Clearly, it's all about reason. If you've forgotten about everything else, you remember reason. I've said it so many times, it's crazy. So, first thing we want to talk about is religion. One of the things the Enlightenment's really going to talk about is reason, not religion. Now, let me be clear about this. This does not mean no God. It's not reason, not God. It just means reason, not religion. What's the difference between religion and God? Religion is sort of the way that human beings interpret God. So that's sort of the way to think about that. So here's the deal. God is actually a really important part of this process, at least in the 1700s. It becomes less and less an essential part of it, but in the 1700s, God's an important part of this. God gives humans reason. That's where it comes from. That's his job. That's what he did. And by giving us reason, he didn't have to do anything else. He gave us the tools to do what we need to do. We don't need to keep sort of, going back to the well. He already sort of made us self-helpers. So what role does the church then play in this whole thing, or religion? And the answer is the church should be sidelined or maybe even eliminated. You know what the church does? Let me just tell you again, from the Enlightenment point of view, the church comes along and tries to tell you how to use your reason, which is the exact opposite of what God intended when he gave you reason. He gave you reason so that you could access it. What ends up happening with church and religion is that you use it as a crutch. I don't have to make the decision because the church makes the decision for me. So God shouldn't necessarily be sidelined. That's not what we're saying here. The church, religion, should be sidelined or eliminated. The rules of religion and the church are based far more on power than they are on reason. So it actually turns out the argument of the Enlightenment is going to be this. The church makes it harder to be moral, not easier, because it's telling you to do this, do this, do this. And there's two things that happen. One, you're not practicing your own reason. You're just taking it on tradition, authority, faith, that essentially I shouldn't, for example, drink. The church says don't drink, therefore I don't drink. I haven't really put my own thought into this. I'm just letting them tell me what to do, which is not using my reason, number one. Number two, if I apply my reason to the question about drinking or not drinking, then my reason will show me what my duty is. And I don't know. It may tell me to drink. It may tell me not to drink. But that is what it means to be moral. To be moral is to follow my reason. To be moral is not to follow the authority of some other thing just telling me what to do. If the church is right about drinking, for example, then my reason will tell me that. If the church is not right about drinking, then I should do what my reason says and not what the church says. So where this is going to lead us to this idea of one of the key ideas of the I can't even speak right now. One of the key ideas of the Enlightenment: subject all your beliefs to criticism. Everything that you just think is taken for granted, absolutely true, check it with your reason first. And if you do that, that's going to be sort of the key thing to the Enlightenment. Kant put it this way. I can't even say it. Sapere aude. Have courage to use your own reason. Don't just sort of rely on what your parents say. Don't rely on what the church says. Don't even rely on what your professor says, even though he is a genius. Tradition in and of itself is worthless. Now, the church is going to make the argument. Now, hold on. You have centuries and centuries of individuals checking their reason and coming up with these answers. And so why recreate the wheel? And the whole thing in the Enlightenment is that's the whole point. You got to check these things. You got to check yourself before you wreck yourself is one of the key elements of the Enlightenment. Accept nothing on authority unless that authority is reason. And again, if we go back to this first line right up here, this is, for many, God. God gave us this. So accept nothing on authority unless that authority is God. Well, how do I do that? Old school used to be the church. New school, God gave you reason. You're cool. You got this. And quite honestly, again, most of us are kind of in that camp that the church, we do accept the church's authority on a lot of things, but usually if our reason says, I don't really agree with what the church is saying on that, the reason usually wins out over the church today. That's just sort of the nature of the thing. In fact, what happens is churches tend to adapt to people's reason as opposed to people's reason tending to adapt to the church. That's not exactly fair. It does kind of go both ways on that, but that's the idea. So that raises another question about what about non-rational aspects of human nature? Like, for example, most people would, who are painting a picture would not say the way that I paint my picture is I apply reason to this, right? What about passions and emotions and all those things we talk about with the arts and the humanities? Like, where do those things fit into this whole thing? Where's poetry? Is the most rational poem the best poem? I mean, that's weird. Where do these non-rational aspects of human nature come in? The answer is reason must be the sole guide. Oh, okay. So what about art? Where does art come in? All right, well, let's think about this for a second. Where would the Enlightenment thinkers think art comes in? One of the things that art is often used for is entertainment, right? To go watch a play. Oftentimes we go to see a movie, we're not going to the movie to learn deep things or anything like that. We want to go see explosions and things like that. What about art as entertainment? The answer is no. Art as entertainment is a bad thing for the Enlightenment. Humans are way too easily diverted. It's hard enough for us to access our reason. Art starts throwing things up there that just takes our mind away from using our reason. No. All right, so what about art then? What about art coming from emotions, right? Like a dance. Have you ever watched So You Think You Can Dance, that show that's like American Idol but with dancing? They get out there and they do these dances that are like super, I don't know, emotional or something like that. I don't get it. It's not how I sort of see the world, but a lot of people do. So where does that come from? And the answer is art coming from emotions is pointless and or harmful. Ugh. Like, here's the deal. A poem that makes you cry, let's say, a poem that makes you sort of get the feels and cry, what does that do for you? And according to the Enlightenment, abso-frickin-lutely nothing. It just does nothing for you. In fact, if anything, you're tapping into your emotions and your passions, which means you're not tapping into your reason. It's going to make you do things you shouldn't do and make you act in ways you shouldn't act. So what must art be? Art must be regular and instructive. That's what we mean by beautiful, or the term that often is talked about at the time, sublime. The beautiful and the sublime. That essentially art must be regular and instructive. Now, let me just be clear about this. This is going to be sort of the heart of the Enlightenment's going to lean here. And what we're going to see, well, we probably won't see it, but you will see this as you start up the next semester of honors, is that there's going to be a huge reaction against this called romanticism. Romanticism is going to sort of react to this and say, go the exact opposite direction. That stop tapping into all your logic and reason. If you really want to know what it means to be human, tap into your emotions and your passions. So this is going to be a thing that sort of goes back and forth for a little bit. But that's one idea. What about education? Where does education fit into this whole thing? Education should impart knowledge, not shape character. The thing that shapes character is reason, right? Reason equals correct action. So what education should do is help you to use this. It should not sit there and I shouldn't tell you how to be. I shouldn't tell you how to think, anything like that. All I should do is help you learn how to access your reason, and your reason will shape your character. Knowledge plus reason equals character development. So what education is education is absorption of knowledge. Then you apply your reason to that, and that's how you're going to grow as a human being. You're going to build character. So education that gets away from this is crappy education. And so we think about, say, for example, the natural sciences, right? When you go into a biology classroom, again, if we're not talking about like neurobiology and things like that, the job is to get knowledge, which you'll then apply to your reason And then, that's where the character development comes from. But that's, all the other stuff is just kind of garbage. The sciences become, again, very, very dominant as a result of this as well. It's already since the scientific revolution, but even more so now, the sciences are a big part of this. All right, we got one more thing to do. We're going to talk about, one more thing we want to do here is we want to talk about the big practical effects. So these are like the idea effects, the theoretical effects. What are the big practical effects we're going to get out of it? And we'll come back and talk about that.